The galactic capital of Voltar Prime stretched before Captain Nathaniel Carter, a shimmering expanse of steel and glass that was the heart of an empire spanning 1,000 worlds. It was a city unlike any he had ever seen, one that felt both ancient and impossibly advanced, a paradox that mirrored the paradox of the Emperor himself. On the surface, it radiated peace, with its grand spires reaching into a sky filled with twin suns. But beneath that polished exterior lay a suffocating order, one that held the galaxy in a grip of iron and fear. Carter's boots echoed on the cold metal floors of the transport shuttle as he disembarked, his heart steady and calm despite the overwhelming alienness of his surroundings. To the casual observer, he was out of place. His black combat armor, worn and battle-scarred, contrasted sharply with the high-tech, pristine uniforms of the Emperor's elite guards that flanked him. His human features, plain, almost unremarkable, seemed to shrink beneath the towering figures of the alien warriors that marched past, their eyes full of disdain. He had heard the stories, legends really, of the Emperor's personal guard, the finest warriors the galaxy had to offer, creatures from distant stars, each more fearsome than the last. The Zelthorians, made of living stone, whose strength was as immovable as a mountain. The Zeriok, reptilian brutes with regenerative abilities that could defy the very laws of biology. And the Talaxans, warriors whose skill in battle was said to be unmatched, even among the galaxy's greatest fighters. Yet here he was, the lone human, summoned to face them in the Emperor's arena. He couldn't help but feel a slight pang of disbelief. How had it come to this? His world was little more than a speck in the vastness of the galaxy, a young, primitive species, barely scraping by on the edge of the known universe. Yet here he stood, hand-picked for this strange and cruel demonstration. The Emperor himself had issued the challenge: prove that humanity was worthy of recognition, or be erased from history. Carter had no illusions about what that would mean if he failed. The doors to the grand hall slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast, opulent chamber. The walls were adorned with gleaming iridescent materials, the ceiling impossibly high, stretching out of sight. At the center stood the Emperor's elite guard, their eyes cold and full of curiosity. The tension in the air was thick, charged with a sharp, mocking laugh broke the silence. Carter looked up to see one of the Zeriok warriors sneering at him from across the room. "Look at this," the reptilian alien spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "A human, pretending to be one of us." The others joined in, their laughter echoing off the walls, a chorus of derision that made Carter's skin prickle. He stood still, a slight frown on his face, but his expression remained impassive. He had been through worse. Mockery, scorn, and hatred. These were things he had endured all his life. None of it would shake him now. As he stood there, waiting for the challenge to begin, the cold eyes of the Emperor's guard turned from amusement to something else, an uncertain flicker. The human warrior had yet to say a word, yet already he exuded an air of quiet confidence that unsettled them. They had underestimated him, just as the Emperor had known they would. And that, Carter realized, was the key. Underestimating him would be their downfall. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the sound of distant footsteps reverberating through the marble halls as the Zeriok warrior, taller and more menacing than any human could dream of, stepped forward. His body was covered in tough, iridescent scales, his sharp claws clicking against the floor with every step. He cracked his knuckles, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest as his eyes locked onto Carter. "You're not even worth the time it takes to crush you," the Zeriok sneered, his tongue flicking out to taste the air. "But the Emperor has spoken. So, let's get this over with." Carter remained still, every muscle in his body tense, but outwardly calm. He had heard worse threats in his lifetime. His mission wasn't just to survive. It was to prove that humanity had something the galaxy hadn't accounted for: resilience. His only chance now was to demonstrate it in the face of ridicule. The Zeriak moved with surprising speed for his massive frame, a blur of claws and fangs as he lunged at Carter. There was no hesitation, no mercy in his attack, only the predatory instinct of a hunter. The human barely had time to react, but his instincts kicked in. As the Zeriak's claws slashed through the air, Carter sidestepped, the movement fluid and precise. He felt the wind rush past him as the claws missed his chest by mere inches. Without wasting a beat, Carter's right fist slammed into the Zeriak's jaw, the sound of bone and muscle crunching filling the room. The Zeriak staggered back, momentarily dazed. He hadn't expected the human to strike so quickly, with such force. His eyes widened, and for the first time the mocking gleam faded from his reptilian gaze. "You dare?" Before he could finish his sentence, Carter was already on him. The human closed the distance between them with a swift, calculated movement, ducking beneath the Zeriak's wildly swinging claws and reaching for the warrior's arm. With a sharp twist, Carter leveraged the creature's own momentum, using his body weight to send the Zeriak crashing to the floor with a resounding thud. The room was silent. The guards who had been laughing earlier stood frozen, their eyes wide, the mocking expressions wiped from their faces. Even the Zeriak himself, now lying on the ground, looked stunned. He growled and tried to rise, but Carter wasn't finished. With a controlled, swift motion, Carter pinned the Zeriak's arm behind his back, immobilizing him. The Zeriak's sharp teeth ground together as he struggled. "You think you can—" "Quiet," Carter said, his voice steady and calm. "This is your lesson." It wasn't a taunt or a boast. It was a quiet assertion of control, a message that would echo through the Emperor's halls, though none of the warriors in the room were willing to acknowledge it yet. Carter wasn't just skilled in combat, he was calm, methodical, and ruthless when necessary. He had been trained to survive against impossible odds. And this was the result. The Zeriak, struggling beneath the weight of the human's grip, finally went limp, his body too battered to continue. Carter stood, releasing the alien's arm with a final, almost casual flick. The Zeriak lay still on the ground, breathing heavily, but unable to rise. The silence in the room was now complete. It hung in the air, thick and oppressive. The Emperor's elite guards, who had once laughed and jeered, were now watching Carter with an intensity that bordered on fear. None of them had expected this. None of them had expected a human, a mere human, to be capable of defeating their strongest warrior. They had underestimated him in every way. And now there would be no going back. The silence in the room was suffocating. Carter could feel the eyes of the Emperor's elite guards burning into him, their collective disbelief hanging like a dark cloud. The Zeriak warrior lay on the ground, still breathing but defeated. His massive form, usually so confident and powerful, was nothing more than a humbled heap at Carter's feet. The mocking laughter that had filled the chamber moments before was gone, replaced by a tense, nervous stillness. Carter didn't relish the moment. He didn't gloat. He simply turned his gaze to the next opponent, the one he knew was coming for him next. It was the Zelthorian, the living stone creature whose sheer size and raw power had intimidated the other warriors. Towering at nearly 9 feet tall, the Zelthorian's massive, blocky form was covered in gray, stone-like skin that shimmered in the light, its eyes glowing like molten lava, fixed on Carter with an intensity that made the human feel small for the briefest of moments. "You think you can survive against me?" the Zelthorian rumbled, its voice like the sound of grinding rocks. "I am the strength of the earth itself." Carter's breath slowed. His mind sharpened. The battle with the Zeriak had been a test of speed and precision, but the Zelthorian was different. Strength, endurance, power. Those were the Zelthorian's weapons, and Carter knew that if he was to survive this encounter, He would need to rely on something else, something more than just speed or skill. He would need to use his intellect. The Zelthorian flexed his fists, making the floor beneath them tremble with the force of his movements. Carter could see the ripples of the creature's muscles under its rocky exterior as it prepared to strike. The air was thick with anticipation. Without warning, the Zelthorian lunged, his giant fist flying toward Carter's face like a boulder hurled from a catapult. The sheer force of the blow was enough to level entire buildings, and Carter had no illusions about what would happen to him if he were caught. His instincts kicked in, and he darted to the side, just barely avoiding the punch. But there was no time to celebrate his success. The Zelthorian was relentless, swinging again and again with the fury of a natural disaster. Carter's body moved on autopilot, dodging and weaving through the onslaught, his heart racing but his mind calm. The Zelthorian's strikes were powerful, but they were predictable, too predictable. The giant's movements, while fast for his size, lacked the fluidity of a true warrior. The key, Carter realized, wasn't to outmuscle the Zelthorian, it was to outlast him. The Zelthorian roared in frustration as Carter continued to slip out of his reach. His giant fists smashed into the floor, splintering the stone tiles, but Carter was always one step ahead. It was clear that the alien was growing tired, his breath coming in heavy bursts as his strength began to wane. Carter could see it now, the subtle cracks in the Zelthorian's facade, the small but noticeable fatigue that had begun to show. And that's when Carter struck. He darted forward, closing the gap with a speed that the Zelthorian couldn't match. The giant swung once more, but this time Carter was ready. He grabbed the Zelthorian's outstretched arm and used its own momentum against it. Twisting his body, he yanked the Zelthorian off balance, sending him crashing to the ground with a deafening roar. Carter didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, positioning himself beside the Zelthorian's prone body. He knew he wouldn't have much time before the creature recovered. With a swift motion, he delivered a precise blow to the Zelthorian's knee, targeting the joint with the force of all his body weight. There was a sickening crack as the alien's knee buckled, and with a bellow of pain, the Zelthorian collapsed onto the floor, unable to rise. The room was deathly quiet. Carter stood over the defeated warrior, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. The Zelthorian, once a symbol of unstoppable power, lay groaning at his feet. It was over. The Emperor's guards, who had once mocked him, now stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected a brief spectacle, an easy fight, a chance to laugh at the human. But Carter had proven them wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. The Zeriok had fallen. The Zelthorian had fallen. And Carter, the human warrior, was still standing. It wasn't just his speed, it wasn't just his strength, it was his adaptability, his cunning, his ability to think in the midst of chaos. And now, as the guards looked at him with new respect, Carter knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had underestimated him. But it was too late to turn back now. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted completely. The previous arrogance of the Emperor's elite guards had evaporated, replaced by a quiet unease. They had expected to witness a swift and humiliating end for the human, but instead, they had watched as Carter dismantled two of their finest warriors with an efficiency and grace they had never seen before. The Zeriok and the Zelthorian were down, defeated, and Carter stood over them, calm and unwavering, his eyes cold and calculating. But now the last test remained. The Thalaxian commander stepped forward, his footsteps thundering like the sound of distant storms. His massive frame, covered in jagged, battle-worn armor, seemed to fill the entire room. His face, a terrifying mask of scars and battle tattoos, was framed by a mane of silver hair that cascaded down his back like a storm cloud. His eyes, cold and unblinking, met Carter's without fear, without hesitation. "You've done well, human," the Thalaxian's voice boomed, a deep, gravelly sound that reverberated off the stone walls. "But this ends now." Carter didn't flinch. He knew that the Thalaxian was the deadliest of them all, the most skilled, the most feared. Every inch of the Thalaxian's body seemed designed for combat, from the blackened bone spurs jutting from his elbows to the razor-sharp axe that hung at his side. The rumors had been true. The Thalaxians were not only fierce warriors, but they were also tactical geniuses, able to read and counter their opponent's every move. This would be a battle of wits as much as strength. The Thalaxian drew his massive battle axe, its blade gleaming in the harsh light of the hall. "I will make this quick," he said, a twisted smile curling on his lips. "You don't belong here." Carter raised an eyebrow. "I think that's for the Emperor to decide." The Thalaxian lunged without warning, his axe sweeping down with blinding speed. It was like the swing of a mountain crashing toward Carter, the force of it capable of cleaving a city wall in half. But Carter had no intention of letting it reach him. His instincts kicked in, and he dove to the side, just narrowly avoiding the slash that would have ended the fight before it truly began. The Thalaxian was already preparing for another strike, his movements fluid and deliberate. Carter's heart pounded in his chest as his mind worked in overdrive. The Thalaxian wasn't like the others. The brute strength of the Zeriok and the raw endurance of the Zelthurian had been overwhelming, but the Thalaxian was different. His attacks weren't just physical, they were psychological. Each move was a feint, a test of Carter's ability to predict and counter. If Carter made even the smallest misstep, it would be his last. Carter's breath was steady, his body loose, his every sense heightened. He had fought against overwhelming odds before, but the Thalaxian was a new kind of challenge, a warrior like no other. The Thalaxian's next strike came fast and low, aimed directly at Carter's midsection. It was a move designed to trap him, to corner him into a position where the human would be forced to defend rather than attack. But Carter saw through the trap. In an instant, he sidestepped, grabbing the Thalaxian's wrist and using the momentum of the swing against him. The human's hand gripped the battle axe's haft with precision, twisting it just enough to send the blade crashing into the stone floor with a deafening clang. For a brief moment, the Thalaxian faltered, but in that instant, Carter was already moving again, his body low to the ground as he closed the distance. He struck with a series of quick, precise jabs to the Thalaxian's ribs, his hands working like lightning. The Thalaxian grunted, staggering back, but it wasn't enough to fully throw him off balance. Carter could feel the tension in the air, the weight of each movement, the gravity of the battle. The Thalaxian recovered faster than Carter had anticipated, his axe swinging once more, but this time Carter was ready. He dodged to the side and with a swift move grabbed the Thalaxian's arm, twisting it behind his back in a technique he had learned in his earliest training days. The Thalaxian let out a roar of pain as his own arm was wrenched backward, the joint grinding under the pressure. Carter's breath came faster now, the fatigue of the battle beginning to show, but he knew this was his moment. The Thalaxian was off balance, his massive frame struggling to regain control. With one final move, Carter drove his knee into the Thalaxian's back, forcing him to the ground. The human's hand shot out, and with a precise motion, he pressed his palm to the Thalaxian's throat, immobilizing him. Hands disappeared in the hair of Carter's hand, garnering a still noisy, barely audible wince. Oh, the room was completely silent now. The Emperor's elite guards had watched in stunned awe as Carter, a human warrior, had brought down one of the most feared beings in the galaxy. The Thalaxian, the last test, lay pinned beneath Carter's grasp, breathing heavily, his pride shattered. The human had done it. The Thalaxian commander let out a low, pained chuckle. "You've earned my respect, human," he grunted, his voice strained. "I've never seen anything like it." Carter stood, stepping back and allowing the Thalaxian to rise. The room remained deathly quiet, save for the hum of the Emperor's guards. No one had expected this. No one had expected Carter to survive, let alone triumph. But he had. The human had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was a force to be reckoned with. And in that moment, the Emperor's elite warriors knew this was no ordinary human. This was a new kind of warrior, one that would leave an indelible mark on the galaxy. The Talaxian commander slowly rose to his feet, his breath ragged but his eyes still burning with the remnants of his warrior pride. He didn't offer Carter a nod of gratitude, nor did he attempt to engage in further combat. Instead, he stepped back, acknowledging, albeit silently, that the battle had been lost. The others in the room, who had watched the fight in stunned silence, now stood still, each one taking stock of what had just transpired. Zariak and Zelthor lay motionless in their places, their once proud figures defeated, and the Thalaxian, though still alive, had been bested in a way none of them had ever expected. And standing amidst them, calm and unbroken, was Carter, the human warrior. The Emperor's elite guards exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier mockery of Carter now a distant memory. They had underestimated him, misjudged his abilities, his resolve, his skill. They had thought him a mere novelty, a fleeting curiosity. But now they saw the truth. This human was not only capable of surviving among them, he had defeated them. He had broken through their defenses, exploited their weaknesses, and emerged victorious. But it wasn't just physical prowess that Carter had demonstrated. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous, an uncanny ability to read his opponents, to understand the flow of battle as if he could see the future, to turn their own strength against them. The Zariak, the Zelthorian, the Talaxian, they were not weak warriors, and they had all underestimated him in different ways. Yet, Carter had proven that he was not to be taken lightly. A low murmur began to ripple through the room, a quiet buzz of disbelief and grudging respect. The guards, usually so controlled, now seemed uncertain of their place in the grand hierarchy of the Emperor's forces. They had faced the mightiest beings the galaxy had to offer, and had watched as this human, this earthling, had torn through them. There was a subtle shift in the air, as if a new power dynamic had been established, one in which the human was no longer a mere pawn in the Emperor's game, but a player who would shape the future. Carter stood tall in the center of the room, not moving, not reacting to the shifting atmosphere around him. He knew better than to show any sign of triumph, but in his chest there was a quiet pride. He had done what was asked of him, not just for himself, but for the people he represented. Earth had sent him to this place as a symbol of defiance, of survival. And now he was the living proof that humanity could stand on equal footing with the galaxy's greatest warriors. The Emperor's voice echoed from the shadows, reverberating through the hall like the roll of distant thunder. Enough. The room fell silent again, the guards standing rigidly at attention, their gazes fixed on the throne from which the Emperor spoke. He had remained unseen throughout the trials, but his presence had loomed large, a constant weight pressing down on the proceedings. Now it was time for his judgment. "You have done well, human," the Emperor's voice rumbled, the words measured and deliberate. "You have proven your worth in the arena, and you have shown that there is more to your kind than I could have ever imagined." Carter didn't speak. He had no need to. The Emperor's words carried weight, and he had earned his respect in the most direct way possible, through action. "You will remain here," the Emperor continued, "not as a symbol, but as a testament to the strength of your species, to the resilience that runs deep within you." The Emperor paused, as if considering something more. "But know this, human, your victory does not guarantee your survival. The galaxy is a vast, cruel place, and power comes at a cost." Carter nodded, understanding the unspoken challenge in the Emperor's words. His victory was only the beginning. The true test lay ahead, not just in proving his worth in the arena, but in navigating the complex, ever-shifting web of power that defined the Emperor's empire. As the Emperor's words echoed in the hall, the other guards shifted uncomfortably. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken tension. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Carter, the human, had left a mark on this galaxy that would not easily be erased. His fight was not over, but for the first time since his arrival, he could feel something shift in the air. The beginning of a new era, an era where humanity, once a mere afterthought, would rise to stand among the stars. And Carter, in his quiet determination, was the first step toward that future.